Arthur Schopenhauer. I know, the name itself sounds pretty pessimistic, right? But what if I told you that this philosopher, often seen as a master of misery, actually wrote one of the most practical guides ever to living a happy life? Today, we're going to dive into this really surprising wisdom from a thinker who believed that, yeah, life is full of suffering, but contentment, that's still very much within our reach. So Schopenhauer kicks things off with this powerful quote from another thinker, Champfort. And it hits you with a paradox right away. If happiness is super hard to find within ourselves, but literally impossible to find anywhere else, well, are we just doomed? Not exactly. Schopenhauer believed there was a path forward, and he basically drew a map for us.
Okay, so before we can even get to happiness, Schopenhauer says we have to understand the two big forces that are always working against it. And these aren't some bad guys out there in the world. They're actually built right into the human condition itself.
He pictures life as a kind of pendulum, just constantly swinging back and forth. We're almost never in that perfect, still, balanced state. Instead, we're always running away from one enemy of our happiness, only to find ourselves running straight into the arms of the other. And here they are, the two poles, pain and boredom. For most of humanity, life is a constant fight against need, against poverty. That's pain. But for the lucky few who escape that, who have all the wealth and security they could want, a whole new enemy pops up. Boredom. That deep, nagging emptiness that comes from having everything. So the takeaway here is that it doesn't matter who you are, you're caught in this battle. So if we're all stuck in this endless swing between pain and boredom, how do we find any scrap of happiness? Well, Schopenhauer believed the answer is in a really simple framework for understanding what actually matters in life. He basically boils down everything that makes up a person's life into just 3 buckets. And this isn't some random list, you know? It's a very deliberate hierarchy, and it's designed to show us exactly where we should be putting our energy to get the biggest bang for our buck when it comes to happiness. So here they are. Pillar 1, what a man is. We're talking his core personality, his health, his mind, his character. Pillar 2, what a man has. This is all his stuff. Property, money, you name it. And pillar 3, what others think of him. His reputation, his rank in society, 3 simple pillars.
But here's the kicker. Are they all equal? Not even close. For Schopenhauer, this is the single most important lesson. What you are, your inner self, is by a huge margin the most critical piece of the puzzle. What you have and what other people think about you are, practically insignificant in comparison. This is the absolute heart of his philosophy on how to be happy.
So it makes sense then, right? If our inner self is what really matters, then the path to a happier life is all about cultivating it. This isn't about some radical personality transplant, but more about developing the riches you already have inside you.
And why is that? Because our personality is the filter for how we see the world. Think about it. The exact same event could be a total tragedy for a gloomy person, a kind of interesting challenge for a cheerful one, and just nothing to a dull person. Our inner world directly paints our outer world.
So what does he mean by inner wealth? Well, he lays out these key things. A naturally cheerful personality, which he says is its own reward, a healthy body, a sharp and active mind, a balanced will that isn't pulling you all over the place, and a good conscience. These, he says, are the real treasures. This is what we should be chasing.
And out of all of those, health is the absolute king. Schopenhauer makes this incredible claim that a whopping 9/10 of our happiness comes down to our health, period. When you're healthy, everything brings you pleasure. But without it, you can't really enjoy anything, not even the greatest riches. As he famously said, a healthy beggar is happier than an ailing king.
And what about your mind? Well, he says a rich intellect is your ultimate defense against that other big enemy of life, boredom. Someone with a lively inner world has endless entertainment right there in their own head, while someone without it, well, they can be bored even in the middle of a carnival.
This metaphor he uses just perfectly captures the goal of his whole philosophy. Cultivating your inner self is like building this cozy, warm, self-sufficient sanctuary. It means that when the world outside gets harsh and cold, you've got this safe place to retreat to, inside your own mind. It's such a powerful, comforting idea.
All right, let's talk about the other 2 pillars, the ones Schopenhauer warns us about, what we have and what people think of us. He doesn't see these as paths to happiness at all. He sees them as dangerous traps, as illusions.
Now, to explain why wealth is such a trap, He actually borrows from the ancient wisdom of Epicurus. Epicurus said our needs fall into three buckets. The first type, things like food and clothes, are natural and necessary, and they're pretty easy to satisfy. But that third class, the desire for luxury, for showing off, for splendor, that is a bottomless pit. It's a chase that literally never ends.
This says it all, doesn't it? Chasing wealth for its own sake is a fool's errand. It just creates more thirst than it could ever quench. Every time you hit a new financial goal, the goalposts just move further out. You're left in this constant state of wanting more. And what about reputation? Our obsession with what other people think. Schopenhauer just calls this vanity. It's the huge mistake of placing our center of gravity not inside ourselves, but in the flighty, shallow minds of other people. We're essentially trying to live in their heads, not our own. The bottom line is, he says that worrying about what other people think is a form of slavery that we put on ourselves. You're handing over the keys to your own peace of mind to a crowd whose thoughts are, as he put it, often superficial, futile, perverse, and erroneous. So where does all of this leave us? The final wisdom from Schopenhauer's guide is really a simple but absolutely profound shift in how we see things. Real contentment doesn't come from piling up stuff or collecting applause. It comes from cultivating who you already are.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? He wrote this almost 200 years ago, long before social media turned other people's opinions into this constant, 24/7 data feed. You have to wonder, maybe this old-school pessimist actually understood the blueprint for modern anxiety better than any of us. It's definitely a question worth thinking about.
Welcome to the deep dive. We're plunging into some big ideas today, trying to pull out, the real nuggets of wisdom. Have you ever just stopped and asked yourself, what really makes for a happy life? Is it like the stuff you own, what people think, or maybe something else entirely? Today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that, and our guide is, well, a pretty unconventional philosopher.
That's right. We're looking into The Wisdom of Life by Arthur Schopenhauer. And this isn't his super dense main philosophy. No, we're focusing on a part called Aphorismen zur Lebensweisheit. It's a collection of essays that are surprisingly practical, especially coming from him.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, our source material points this out, is that Schopenhauer didn't just, sit in a room and think this stuff up. He apparently based his ideas on actual observed facts on real life. He had this abnormal early education, saw more of the world than just books. That's why they say he was original, forcible, clear, and really disliked philosophical vagueness, a philosopher who had actually seen the world.
Absolutely. And he had this great metaphor for his own system, a citadel with 100 gates. You can sort of enter from anywhere. So for this deep dive, we're using these specific essays from his Parerga and Paralipomena. They make sense on their own, give you practical stuff, even if they, hint at the bigger picture.
Okay, so our mission today is pretty clear then. We want to pull out the most important, maybe even actionable bits about happiness and living well straight from Schopenhauer's observations. We're aiming to get his unique view without getting too bogged down in, the heavy metaphysics, giving you a kind of shortcut to his core ideas for life.
Right. But before we jump into the practical advice, we kind of need to touch on the worldview it comes from, which is pretty stark. Schopenhauer's core idea is that everything, us included, is driven by this relentless will, a kind of blind, constant striving or desire.
Okay, will. A constant desire. That sounds, it sounds pretty bleak, doesn't it? If we're always needing something, are we just perpetually unfulfilled? Always chasing?
Yeah, that's basically it. For Schopenhauer, if your fundamental nature is need, then life is inherently about need and pain. So for him, pleasure isn't really a positive thing in itself. It's more just the absence of pain. It's relief, fleeting relief. He famously called existence an unmixed evil, a tragedy, with death as the only certainty, life as this blind, unreasoning force.
Wow. Okay. So given that darkness, how does he even begin to talk about the wisdom of life? It seems like a contradiction.
It does, but that's the fascinating part of this work. He sort of steps back from the high metaphysics. He acknowledges the harsh reality, but then asks, okay, given all that, how then can a man make the best of his brief hour under the hard conditions of his destiny? What's the true wisdom of life? He's trying to offer practical navigation, even if the underlying map is grim. He sees it as dispelling illusions, maybe a violent operation sometimes.
That's a really interesting pivot. So faced with this grim reality, where does he start with the practical advice? How does he break down this wisdom?
He kicks things off by setting up 3 fundamental categories, sort of like buckets, that determine our happiness. First, there's what a man is. This is your intrinsic self-personality in the broadest sense. Think health, strength, beauty, temperament, moral character, intelligence, education, everything internal.
Okay, what a man is. Makes sense. What are the other 2 buckets?
The second is what a man has. Pretty straightforward. This means property, possessions, wealth, all the external stuff you accumulate. And the third category is how a man stands in the estimation of others. This is about your reputation, your rank, your honor, basically what other people think of you.
Right, and this is where he immediately makes a really crucial point, isn't it? He doesn't see these 3 as equal.
Not at all. He states right away that what a man is, your personality, your inner self, is much more vital and radical for happiness than the other 2. Property and position. He sees those as just consequences of human arrangements, kind of artificial. He quotes Metrodorus saying, "The happiness we receive from ourselves is greater than that which we obtain from our surroundings."
Because our inner state is the direct source of how we feel, right? Surroundings are just indirect.
Exactly. Our inner constitution is the immediate source of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. Everything else filters through it. That's why the same event can make one person miserable and another indifferent. The world shapes itself chiefly by the way in which he looks at it, Overly. He gives this example: a fool reads Goethe or Byron and envies them for the exciting things that supposedly happen to them, instead of envying the poet's incredible power of fantasy that could turn something ordinary into something amazing.
So the external circumstances, the role you play in life, don't matter nearly as much as the inner person experiencing it. He uses that poor player analogy, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. He says, think about actors on a stage. One plays a prince, one a minister, one a servant. These are just mere external differences, just roles. Yeah. But underneath, the inner reality is the same. A poor player with all the anxieties of his lot. On a way, he argues it's the same in real life. Rank and wealth give you different roles, but they don't guarantee different levels of inner happiness or suffering. He even says the dull consciousness of a fool, even surrounded by luxury, is poor indeed compared to Cervantes' imagination while writing Don Quixote in a miserable prison.
That really drives the point home. Okay, so let's dive deeper into this first most important category. What a man is, his personality. He says it's the chief thing to consider because it's always with you, coloring everything.
No.
He loves the phrase to enjoy oneself.
Yes, he finds it very striking because you don't say he enjoys Paris. You say he enjoys himself in Paris. The enjoyment fundamentally comes from the person.
And within that personality bucket, what does he prioritize most?
Health and cheerfulness. Absolutely number 1. He famously says health outweighs all other blessings so much that one may really say that a healthy beggar is happier than an ailing king. And cheerfulness. That's the very flower of health. It's an immediate gain, the actual coin of happiness, not just a promise of it like wealth. He calls it the highest blessing for beings like us, living these fleeting moments between 2 eternities. He even observes you often see more cheerful faces among the working poor than the ill-humored rich.
And his advice for keeping healthy sounds surprisingly modern, doesn't it?
It really does. Avoid excess. Avoid violent emotions, avoid mental overload, get daily outdoor exercise, take cold baths, basic hygiene stuff. He quotes Aristotle, life is movement. You need to keep both body and mind active.
But it's not just about physical health determining cheerfulness, is it? He talks about temperament.
Right. He acknowledges this innate diversity of temperament. He references Shakespeare and Plato's distinction between the eukolos, the easygoing type, and the dyskolos, the difficult, irritable type. And he makes this interesting point that susceptibility to pleasure and pain often seem to vary inversely. High sensitivity to pain might mean lower sensitivity to pleasure, and vice versa.
That sensitivity links into another core idea of his, the 2 foes of human happiness, pain and boredom. He sees life as oscillating between them.
A violent oscillation, yeah. That's a really insightful framework. He says the poor, the masses, are primarily battling pain, lack, hardship, physical suffering. But the wealthy and secure, they're often fighting a constant and often desperate battle with boredom. And here's the kicker, tying back to temperament. Susceptibility to pain seems to vary inversely with susceptibility to boredom. So duller minds, less mentally active people feel pain less acutely, maybe, but they're highly prone to that vacuity of soul, that inner emptiness, which is boredom. They constantly need external stimulation, gossip, trivial pastime, just anything to fill the void.
Which logically leads to the immense value he places on inward wealth.
Yeah.
The mind.
Precisely. Nothing is so good a protection against such misery as inward wealth, because the greater it grows, the less room it leaves for boredom. A rich inner life, an active mind, offers inexhaustible activity of thought. It lifts you above boredom's reach.
And this connects to why intelligent people often prefer solitude.
Makes sense, doesn't it? The more a man has in himself, the less he will want from other people. They're self-sufficient, intellectually. He contrasts this sharply with the fool who groans under the burden of his miserable personality when alone and constantly seeks company, any company. He quotes Seneca, "Folly is its own burden." He even provocatively suggests sociability is often inversely proportional to intellect.
So leisure, which should be this great reward, becomes a problem for many. They don't know what to do with it.
Exactly. That fruit of existence turns sour. Most people just think merely how they shall spend their time, leading to dullness and boredom. He's famously scathing about card playing, calling it the chief occupation of society and a sign of its emptiness, even demoralizing, because the aim is just to win money from others.
Yeah.
You can almost hear his exasperation.
He really doesn't pull any punches there. So wrapping up this first section, it all comes back to self-sufficiency.
Absolutely. What a man has in himself is the chief element in his happiness, he quotes Aristotle again. To be happy means to be self-sufficient. External sources, possessions, reputation are inherently uncertain, precarious, fleeting. They fade, especially in old age. But a person rich in themselves, he paints this lovely picture. They're like a bright, warm, happy room at Christmastide, while without are the frost and snow of a December night.
So the practical takeaway for you, the listener, seems pretty clear. Schopenhauer would say focus more on maintaining your health and cultivating your mind, your faculties, than just piling up wealth. He warns strongly against sacrificing that inner development for external stuff. He describes that rich guy relentlessly chasing gold like an ant, but with a blank mind, unhappy, bored, ultimately just passing it on. It's a stark choice he presents.
Okay, let's pivot now to the second category. What a man has. Property, wealth. He starts by bringing in Epicurus's classification of needs, which is really useful, I think. 3 types. First, natural and necessary needs, food, shelter, basic stuff. These, he says, are actually pretty easy to satisfy. Second, natural but not necessary needs like, say, certain sensory pleasures, a bit harder. And third, needs that are neither natural nor necessary, luxury, extravagance, showing off. And these, he warns, are basically a bottomless pit. They never come to an end and are very hard to satisfy.
It's that treadmill of desire again, like his analogy about riches and seawater.
Exactly. Riches, one may say, are like seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you become, and the same is true of fame. He argues there's just no absolute or definite amount of wealth that will make someone happy. It's always relative to what you want versus what you have. Your horizon of expectation keeps shifting. Lose money, your expectations drop, and the pain eventually fades. Gain money, expectations rise, and the pleasure is short-lived. Money itself is unique, though, he notes. It's an abstract satisfaction of all possible desires, unlike a specific thing. In that sense, it's absolutely good.
And he has this interesting observation about how people manage money depending on how they got it.
Yeah, it's quite insightful. He says people who inherit wealth tend to understand the difference between capital and interest. They're often more careful, focused on preserving the capital. But people who make their own fortune often treat their talent or skill as their capital and just spend the earnings, the interest. They don't save as much. The risk. If their talent becomes outdated or fails, they can end up poor because they didn't build a separate capital base. Sort of psychological difference in approach.
He also has that counterintuitive idea about poverty and extravagance.
Right. He suggests that maybe those born rich are more careful because they see wealth as essential, something to protect, whereas someone who rises from poverty might see wealth as a superfluity, something extra beyond the natural state of poverty they knew. So they might be more prone to spending lavishly. He quotes Shakespeare. "Beggars mounted run their horse to death." It's a bit harsh, maybe, but it's an observation about psychology.
Yeah.
He even argues that a rich person who does nothing useful becomes an idler and thief of time, unhappy because of boredom, prone to extravagance just to fill the void. Better off if poverty had given them something to do.
Wow. Okay. And his advice for politicians or those aiming for public life, it's pretty cynical.
Oh, totally cynical. He basically says it's better to start with nothing, be an absolute pauper. Why? Because poverty supposedly breeds the necessary servility, the willingness to bow and scrape and flatter your way up. Low aims rule the world, he quotes. Someone born with money. They tend to be more independent, hold their head higher, and they'll struggle in that world because they just can't or won't be servile enough.
All right. Let's move to the third bucket. How a man stands in the estimation of others. Reputation, honor, rank, fame. He seems pretty skeptical about caring what others think.
Deeply skeptical. He calls it a peculiar weakness of human nature, to place too much value on other people's opinions, things that are not in itself essential to happiness. He uses that simple analogy. Stroke a cat, it purrs. Praise a man even with a blatant lie, and he looks delighted. We just seem wired to crave that external validation.
And while maybe having a sense of honor keeps society functioning somewhat, he thinks obsessing over it damages our actual happiness.
Yeah, he concedes it might have some salutary effect as a stand-in for true morality. But ultimately, it's disturbing and prejudicial to real peace of mind and independence. It makes you a slave to what others think.
Because their opinions aren't even really about us, in a way.
Exactly. What we are for other people is their consciousness, not ours. It's happening in their heads. Besides, he argues, these opinions are usually superficial and futile, narrow, perverse, absurd, totally unworthy of any attention. Even the greatest people will be dismissed by half a dozen blockheads. So why give those opinions so much weight? This leads him to attack the whole honor dearer than life idea. He calls it an exaggerated statement that really just means we value others' opinions more than our own existence and well-being.
And the root cause of this, for him, is vanity. How does he define vanity specifically?
He sees vanity as the core folly here. It's the desire to get an immediate payoff, feeling good from something that doesn't really exist directly for you, i.e. someone else's thoughts. He calls it a universal mania, blaming it for nearly half the troubles and bothers of life. It drives all our show and swagger, so much luxury spending. Think of the French focus on la gloire, he says. He uses those really stark examples, criminals facing execution, like Thomas Wick's bowing to the crowd or Lecomte worrying about not being shaved. He sees these as extreme but telling reflections of this deep-seated human folly.
So what's the antidote, according to Schopenhauer?
Basically, dial it down. Reduce the impulse. He suggests a retired mode of life helps because it lets you return upon ourselves, escape the constant pressure of external judgment. And he draws that crucial distinction between pride and vanity.
Right. Tell us about that distinction.
Pride for him is internal. It's an established conviction of one's own paramount worth. Quiet confidence comes from within. Vanity is external. It's the desire of rousing such a conviction in others. It needs an audience, constantly seeking validation. That's why proud people might be quiet, while vain people are often chatterboxes.
He also takes a shot at national pride, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, a big one. Calls it the cheapest sort of pride. He argues that if someone's main source of pride is their nation, it usually means they have no qualities of his own of which he can be proud. Ouch. For him, individuality is a far more important thing than nationality. And then that classic line, every nation mocks at other nations, and all are right.
And rank, like titles and social standing.
Dismissed pretty quickly. Purely conventional value, a sham, a mere farce. Orders and medals are just bills of exchange drawn on public opinion. Useful for impressing the masses who lack judgment, but intrinsically worthless. Okay, now let's dig into his different types of honor. He breaks it down further.
Yeah, this seems important. Civic, official, sexual honor.
Right. Civic honor is fundamental.
Yeah.
It's about respecting others' rights, the basic requirement for peaceful society. It rests on the idea that moral character is fixed, so honor, once lost, can never be recovered. Its value is indirect. It affects how others treat you. Official honor is simpler. It's just the reputation you have for competence in your job or position. Higher rank, more honor attached. Pretty straightforward.
Then there's sexual honor. His views here feel very much of their time, maybe a bit jarring for us now.
Definitely of their time, and based on a kind of pragmatic, almost utilitarian view, not inherent morality. For women, he saw it as a collective strategy, an esprit de corps. Basically, society, in his view, needed women to uphold this code to ensure men would commit to marriage and provide for them. A woman breaking the code betrays the whole female race by undermining this system. Its value is relative, societal, not absolute. For men, their sexual honor was about upholding their side of the marriage treaty, specifically exclusive possession. Again, it's framed very pragmatically around social structures. The value for us is maybe seeing how societal expectations become codes of honor.
But then we get to knightly honor, the point d'honneur. He really lets loose on this one.
Oh, absolutely skewers it. He calls it a strange, savage, and ridiculous code, something totally unknown to the Greeks, Romans, or Asian cultures, a purely medieval European invention. And its core principles are just absurd to him. First, honor isn't about what you are, but what people say. An insult doesn't stain you unless it's spoken aloud. Second, your honor is completely at the mercy of every man who can talk it away. An insult is taken as fact unless you wipe it out in blood, a duel. Third, the duel supposedly restores honor, regardless of your actual character or whether the insult was true. Fourth, this weird escalation logic, the advantage. If someone insults you, you have to respond with greater rudeness. A slap requires a blow with a stick, etc. Fifth, to receive an insult is disgraceful, to give one honorable. So the rudest person is always right. Intellect counts for nothing. Ultimately, it all comes down to physical force, brutality, the right of might. And he points out the hypocrisy. Only your word of honor is sacred, but you can break it by dueling. And gambling debts become the only truly unbreakable debts of honor.
It sounds completely irrational. He uses that Socrates example again, doesn't he, about being kicked?
Exactly. Socrates basically shrugged it off, asking if he should resent being kicked by an ass. Schopenhauer contrasts this with the point honor, where a physical blow, a trivial physical injury, becomes this huge catastrophe demanding potential death.
Yeah.
It elevates public perception and physical response over reason and inner worth.
Did he actually propose a way to get rid of dueling?
He did, and it's quite radical, almost satirical. A homeopathic cure, he called it, his proposal. If anyone sends or accepts a duel challenge, they should receive public corporal punishment, say, 12 strokes with a stick, Chinese style, in broad daylight, fighting shame with greater shame. But then he adds cynically that governments probably aren't really serious about stopping it anyway, because this code of honor is a cheap way to keep soldiers and officials motivated when pay is low.
Wow. Okay, so finally, after all that, we get to fame. How does he see fame compared to honor?
He calls fame the undying brother of ephemeral honor. Honor is fleeting. Fame can last. He distinguishes two paths to fame, through actions, coming from a great heart, or through works, coming from a great head. He argues fame from works is superior because works, art, philosophy, science physically remain. They continue to live and influence people directly across centuries. Actions become just memories, fading over time. Think Plato or Homer still directly impacting us.
But getting famous, especially for important work, isn't easy, he says.
No, it's very difficult, especially for profound original work. It often languishes in obscurity until later generations with intelligence of a higher order recognize its value. He has that famous line, "The longer a man's fame is likely to last, the later it will be incoming." It takes time for truly great work to be understood and appreciated. He blames this partly on human nature, moral baseness, and envy. People resist new claims to fame because another's praise is one's own depreciation. Mediocrity tends to ally against excellence.
So if fame is hard to get and often comes late, what's its actual value? Is it even worth pursuing?
For Schopenhauer, the real value isn't getting fame, it's deserving it. Fame itself is just what a man is in comparison with others. It's relative. The true happiness lies in having the merits, the great qualities, the great mind, and the capacity and leisure to develop and express them. What excites admiration must be of more value than the admiration itself. So posthumous fame, the truest fame, is kind of irrelevant to the person's happiness while they were alive. Their happiness was in the doing, in the being. Though he does note, fame sometimes arrives nicely in old age, just as other pleasures are fading.
Does he differentiate different kinds of intellectual fame?
Yes, briefly. Fame for ideas about everyday experience can be widespread, but it's hard to be truly original. Fame from specialized knowledge, facts not accessible to everybody, is easier to achieve originality in, but the audience is limited. The highest fame, he suggests, comes from tackling the biggest questions, nature as a whole and humanity in its widest range. Those ideas have the potential to impact everyone who understands the basics.
What a journey through Schopenhauer's practical thought. It feels like we've covered a huge amount. But the central thread, weaving through everything, is his insistence that what a man is. Your personality, your inner world, your intellect is just fundamentally more important for happiness than what he has or how others see him.
Absolutely. That's the core takeaway. Even this famous pessimist, Schopenhauer, ended up offering this very practical, almost life-affirming advice in a way. Life might be a tough compromise between pain and boredom, as he saw it, but the best way to navigate it is to cultivate your intrinsic qualities. The wealth of the soul is the only true wealth, as he puts it.
It really makes you stop and think about your own priorities, doesn't it? Where's your focus? Are you maybe too caught up in chasing external approval or accumulating stuff? What small step could you, the listener, take today to live a bit more authentically from that inner self, regardless of what the world throws at you or thinks of you?
That's the challenge he leaves us with, I think. A really provocative thought to end on. If happiness really is found mainly inside, not out there in the fleeting world, what illusions are you still clinging to? And what would it actually look like for you to start cultivating that inner world, letting go of the constant need for external validation or measures of worth, something to really chew on?